Good afternoon, and you are now listening to the monthly RELO Andes English language webinar, coming to you from two places today. We are in the United States Embassy, deep down in the heart of it, broadcasting, and I'm Rob O'Leary, and I'm sitting here with
Lisa Wakefield. Good afternoon. Buenas tardes.
And we are the English language fellows here in Peru. And we have a very special guest today. We'll introduce her just now. It's Lisa Pai, and she has just arrived at her site, and she's going to tell you a little bit about herself and where she is right now. Lisa, take it away.
Thanks, Rob. Hi, Lisa. Buenas tardes. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in this afternoon. As Rob and Lisa said, my name is also Lisa, and I'm coming to you live from Ecuador, from Quito. A beautiful day here, and I'm very happy to be participating with the RELO Andes. So today, well, here's a little additional information about my background as an EFL teacher, an ESL teacher, teacher trainer. But today, I really wanted to spend time talking a little bit more about formative assessment for busy teachers.
Oh my God, what is a formative assessment, Lisa?
Well, we're going to find out, Rob. Why don't you hang in there, everybody? I'm glad you're all here, and let's take our next slide. And oh gosh, we have a question for you. It's a poll question. If you're new to RELO Andes webinars, we're going to ask you to participate in a poll. Have you ever heard of formative assessment before? And so we're going to ask you to indicate if you've ever heard of formative assessment.
Okay, Lisa, before I send that out there, let's we'll give people like a second or two. They're probably still logging on. It says yes, thumbs up, and no thumbs down. What was that thumbs up and thumbs down about before we launched the poll?
Well, great question. As you all have noticed, we are live as a webinar, but if we were in a classroom, the first thing that we could ask you to do is to actually have every single person in the room raise their hand and give us a thumbs up, which is your thumb, or thumbs down that you don't understand. And that way we could actually see very quickly how many people have heard about formative assessment.
Ah, excellent. So we can't show our thumbs up, thumbs down, but as we launch this poll in just about 5 seconds, you'll be able to vote yes, I know what formative assessment is, I've heard of it, or no. And now let's share it. Let's take a look at those results. And Lisa, number 2, take it away.
65% of the people online have heard of formative assessment, and 35 say no.
That's fantastic. So, well, let's go ahead and talk a little bit more about what we're going to be learning about today about formative assessment. So here, if you just indulge me for a moment, I'm just going to read through what we're going to be discussing over the next hour. So we're going to learn about the purpose and differences between summative and formative assessment, discover how to be more mindful when using formative assessment. Number 3, learn some additional formative assessment strategies to use in your classroom instruction today, tomorrow, or when you come back from vacation. And 4, talking a little bit about how to create an environment where students become more engaged and become more responsible for their own learning by using formative assessment. So 65% of you said that you have heard about formative assessment, and you probably have heard formative assessment in its relationship to summative assessment. So the differences is that they are used at different times in the learning cycle. 2, they provide different kinds of feedback to the teacher and to the student. And the importance is it's different in one is very low stakes or one has very high stakes in terms of outcome. I'll talk about that in just a moment. So if you take one thing away today, I want you to look at the asterisk where it says that formative assessment tells us how we are learning, and summative assessment tells us what we have learned. So if we take a look at what is summative assessment, here are some examples that I know you're all familiar with. We do end of chapter tests, end of unit tests, end of semester tests, report cards, and perhaps even a TESOL test. Examples of formative assessment. What we have here are just a few examples of formative assessment. Today we're going to be talking about observations, questioning, exit and admissions slips, kinesthetic assessments and learners, 4 walls and corners, Thinkpairshare, and appointment clocks. So again, formative assessment tells us how we are doing.
Can I just jump in just a second? Can we go back for 2 seconds?
Sure can.
You have 16 things there, and we're going to do maybe half of them or a little less than half. Since we don't have time for all of them, how can our listeners learn more about, say, visual representation or graphic organizers?
Well, that's a great question. At the very end of the presentation, we have a link to some additional information about these types of formative assessments and a little bit more detailed information about what a teacher would do to use those types of formative assessment, why they'd be using them, and what it would look like in a classroom, and what students are doing with that type of formative assessment. Great question. So just to reiterate what we just said, how can you use formative instruction to gain more insight or be more mindful of how your students are learning? And the second question that we're going to pose and think a little bit about is, how can teachers create an active classroom where students are responsible for their own learning? Which is something, especially when you have a classroom of about 60 students or 40 students, or if you're grading papers for 250 students, this is an important thing. We want our students to become a little bit more responsible, where they can think about how their learning is going and what they still need to learn and what they've already mastered. Okay, so let's take a look at this here. We've had a lot of fun thinking about thumbs up and thumbs down polls, but here's a question for you. What information does the simple thumbs up and thumbs down give you as a teacher or give to the student? So if it's a simple question, do you like pizza, or are you familiar with agriculture and environment? Yes or no? So that might be a simple way to figure out the entire class with their thumbs up or thumbs down. But sometimes students have heard about it, or they're not quite confident that they could be a teacher or master that skill. So what you might want to think about is a thumbs up, thumbs down, but thumbs in the middle, kind of, you can see and gauge very quickly if students need to go back and relearn, or if you need to talk to them a little bit more about what you're hoping that they're going to gain from the class that day. If you
want to ask a quick question?
You sure can.
So when you do this thumbs up, thumbs down, somewhere in the middle, if you ask a question and you get your responses, and say you get a lot of people, more than half the students in the middle, when would you reteach that information? When would you go back to that stuff to make sure you can turn that to an upside finger, a thumbs up?
That's a really great question. So you as a teacher, we're always making those decisions. If you should do it now, should it be something that students can do together? It really depends on what it is that you're hoping that they're going to get. It could be an entire week's worth of lessons, and at the very end, Rob, what I would do is if you're reteaching it today, I would ask them again immediately, thumbs up, thumbs down, or thumbs in the middle, or at the very end of your unit, just per topic, you could ask them. And students themselves would see that they have moved from the middle to hopefully thumbs up.
What about, like, if you did it at the end of one class and you got that response, lots of middle or downward thumbs, would you reteach it the next day?
Yep, I think that's a great question. You want to bridge. You always want to bridge the next day as students come in, and I think this would be a great admit question. Maybe students went home and thought about it. Maybe it was part of their homework, or students can come in the next day and you can ask them again. Maybe now they have a better understanding after they've been thinking about it, or not, and then you can make that decision if you need to reteach it right away.
Okay, great, thank you.
Okay, so again, the types of questions that we ask are connected to the types of information that we want to get from our students to see how they are in their learning. So we've talked about thumbs up, thumbs down, but thumbs in the middle. But here, we could also do A, B, C, or D. At the very beginning, we talked about formative assessment, but I have a feeling that some of you are very knowledgeable about formative assessment, but that 65% really didn't give me the chance to see how many people are very knowledgeable. Or B, perhaps they can use it and you've been using it in the classroom, or C, you've heard of it, or D, you've never heard of it. So by having 4 gradients or scaled question, you have a better opportunity, you have an opportunity to see where exactly your students are in their learning. So what does that look like in the classroom? We have very busy classrooms. Students can come in and put a check mark. How much do they know about the history of water? So they can say they're very knowledgeable, or they're not knowledgeable, or somewhere in between. So they can write a check mark, and then at the very end of the class, you can go back to this poll, and hopefully students will be able to switch boxes and go a little bit further ahead there. Some classrooms are a little bit larger. Sometimes we have students who really need to walk around quite a bit, and that's how they learn, our kinesthetic learners. So if you've got room in your classroom, what you can do is you can actually move students to different walls, and then they can see exactly where they are with the class, and you can see exactly where they are. And sometimes this is really fun to do with an agree or disagree question. Again, going back to that pizza, do you like pizza? Agree or disagree? Or another popular topic is, do you think that we should have student uniforms in class or in schools? And so once the students separate and go to their side or their corner, they can actually engage a little bit more in depth and have individual conversations to be able to present back to the class and creating an argument. But they've self-sorted, and they've done it very quickly for you. And then you can see where students are. So Thinkpairshare, also known as elbow partners, it's if you don't have room in your classroom, or if you just want to do a real quick conversation so students have a chance to talk through the concepts that you're talking about. They can turn to an elbow partner and explain the differences here between formative and summative assessment if we were sitting in a classroom. And then I would actually ask you to turn to a different elbow partner, and that reinforces learning a little bit. And again, you can use a different question. So looking down here, what is the teacher doing when you're doing a Thinkpairshare or you're doing an elbow partner? The teacher's always observing, listening, and providing feedback to the entire class. So the teacher can say, oh, I've heard a number of you are still finding this very challenging, whatever that topic might be. And then you can address it right there. Or if it's only 1 or 2 groups, you can go right in and reteach right there while they're still with their pair, and then move on.
Do they only share with each other, or is there a way for them, after sharing with each other, to share with the class?
It's always really great to think individually, work with a pair, and then to share out with an entire class. So a great strategy is to have the students actually present their information. So when you're walking around the room and observing what they're doing, you might hear some great answers, and you can ask those students to share with the entire class. And it's a great way to engage everyone at the same time, right?
Before we move on, we just have a clarifying question from Maria del Rosario Palomero Vega. Sorry if I got that wrong. She says, but a teacher can be correcting if he or she observes any mistakes, correct?
A teacher can be correcting, yes. But initially, what I would suggest doing is listening to how students are answering the question. That's a really great question. And you have, as teachers, we make those decisions. Should I correct right now quietly with that pair or that group? Or does it seem like the entire class needs reteaching? So it really depends on where the students are and if it needs to be brought out from the entire class. That's a great question.
Okay.
Well, and I think maybe they were thinking of, error correction in grammar. Not to be confused with correcting grammar errors versus correcting content errors in your Thinkpairshare.
Excellent question. So it depends on where your students are or what you're trying to do, depending upon their level. I like to give them actually sentence stems that they can use or grammar structures that they can use, and so you can actually listen to what they're doing, and then you can always very quietly, if they're not using it correctly, just point back to how they can use it correctly in a very quiet way, unless it's the entire class, right? Does that connect to what you're saying, Lisa?
Yeah, I think so. I think sometimes we just get grammar correction we're not allowed to correct, but content correction is a different topic. So I just wanted to clarify that.
I think that's a great clarification. I'm glad you brought that up. So the slide that we have up right now is called Clock Partners, and some of you might have heard about this before. So Clock Partners is kind of like elbow partners, but students get to move around the room. What I really like about Clock Partners is that once it's set up, you can use these Clock Partners throughout the entire lesson, throughout the entire week or a couple of weeks, and the students have already sorted themselves into pairs or triads or to different groups, depending upon what you want. So it doesn't actually have to be 9 o'clock in the morning, but they just find a partner that they would like to meet, and then when you say, okay, find your 9 o'clock partner and discuss whether or not we should have uniforms in school, then they can move directly to that person's name that they wrote down. And it doesn't actually have to be a clock. It can be just a list. It can be, here we have some additional ideas. Students can use it on a piece of paper. They can use their notebooks. You know, if you've got a paper plate, you can actually draw a clock depending upon your learners. And so students are able to work together with that. And you don't have to have just 3, 9, 12, and 3. You can do, you know, 10, 12, 2, and 4. It depends on what you're trying to do. But it's a great way to have students stop and pause and talk a little bit about what they want to do. So if you're not familiar with Clock Partners, the teacher tells the students to find a partner to write that down. And while they're working with their partner, it's really important that as the teacher, we tell them exactly what we want them to do while they're working with that partner and how long the partners will work together. So it's very important to have a time manager or time clock where students can see how long they might be able to work together. So down at the bottom here.
Just so you know, I've actually done this as well, and it's a very good way of not only for students to get to know each other, but again, if you're working with foods or different ideas where they have to share that information and then share it out with the class, and you can share it with many people. It works very well in many different versions.
And it gets the students engaged in the classroom, and they're moving around, and importantly, they're talking and they're thinking about what they already know, and they're using what they already know, and you can actually observe and hear what might need to be retaught. So again, the teacher moves around the room and repeats back to the class how things are going, or assesses how things are going individually. So now this is a comments question. We're going to throw this out to everybody to talk a little bit about in our comments section. If you could write down one thing that you would like to learn about formative assessment. And we've been talking about it for quite a while now. Is there something that you'd like us to think about as a teacher? What would you like us to know? How are things going? What would you like to learn more about?
They're coming in, so while we wait, Lisa, is there anything else you'd like to let us know about your arrival in Ecuador?
Oh gosh, Ecuador, thank you for asking, is fantastic, and I'm hoping we have some listeners in Ecuador today in Quito. I'm really excited to be here, and this is so much fun to do these webinars. So I'm really glad to be able to participate with the Peru teachers as well, with our region.
Well, we're thankful that you're helping us out.
Yes, and I think all of our teachers will benefit, and hopefully we have a lot of cross-pollination from your country and our country and all around. Okay, we're getting a few responses or a few questions.
Lisa, one is it important to use in every class, and how do I make sure I use it properly?
Okay, that's a great question, and that I'll just say that I think we need another webinar on that, because we can delve really deep into that. To answer the question, how many per classroom? I like to try to do maybe 3 quick checks for an 80-minute period, or 4 checks. It really depends on what you're doing. Formative assessment really just tells us how the students are learning. It's not a grade that's going to go into our grade book, and ideally it allows us to know what we need to reteach, and it allows the students to think about what they already know. So it depends. There's natural breaks as we're teaching where you can just do a thumbs up and a thumbs down real quick, or a thumbs in the middle. And so there's one right there. And what was the second part of that question, Lisa?
How do we make sure we use it properly?
Oh, okay, great. So teachers are always trying to do the very best that they possibly can. The thing that I really like about formative assessment is that you can make it your own. What works best for you, what works best for the material that you're trying to teach your students, and what works best for your students, and helping them to be engaged and to become more responsible for their own learning. So I would say there's no right way or wrong way to do any of these. You can make up your whatever works best for you. These are just ideas that you can use in your classroom.
Okay, and we have a lot of questions. We're not going to be able to get to all of them, but someone did ask. It was Lourdes Velasquez Rivera. I would like to know about exit tickets. Are they a good idea? And how do you use them in big classes?
Okay, so that's a great lead-in question for the next one. So we all know, we don't have enough time to read through all of these great questions that you have. As the teacher, or as you're being part of the workshop today, I would take these questions home and see where are most of our questions. Are they about how to use these, or do you need additional ideas, or how to make the connections to your curriculum? And tomorrow morning, if we were all to get together again, we would go over those again. So as the teacher, I would ask my students the same thing. Write down 2 things that you've learned today and one that you think you might like to relearn or that you need to relearn. Or write down vocabulary, or draw a picture or a vocabulary word. Or maybe you have got a specific question about the concept or content. And then we're going to talk in a minute about 4 squares on a paper with specific questions. So comments, having students write down where you don't actually have to make a grade or even make a comment, or sometimes you don't even have to have the students sign their name to the paper. They just give you ideas about how is their learning, what's going on. So you can do that at the beginning of class. That's an admit ticket, or an exit ticket as they walk out the door. If you wanted to have students write those down on a slip of paper, they could do that. If you wanted to get really fancy, you can use a Post-it note, and then you could have students the next day when they came in, you could group those for them, or they could group them themselves. So you take this information and you provide feedback to the entire class, either immediately, if it's right away in the morning, or right after students have arrived, or the next morning when they come in the next day. So 4 squares is something that students can write into their notebook. You can collect this, or students can keep this, and they can write every single day, what did they learn today, or what did you learn about, and what would you like to learn more about this topic? And perhaps they still have one question that it remains unanswered that you didn't have time to answer in the classroom. And then importantly, how does this connect with what we have learned? So we always want to connect what we learned yesterday. We want to bridge to the next topic the next day. So students can answer these questions in their notebook and bring this out the next day so they've got their questions ready. Or you can have students write them on a piece of paper and you collect them. Or if they don't have paper, they can write them on a board. Or, this would be a great opportunity for you to do clock partners for the next day. You could 9, 10, 11, and 12 and go from there. So do we have any questions about the purpose and differences between summative and formative assessment? I'm hoping you've got those figured out. We have lots of summative assessments that we do all the time. The end of the unit, the end of the school year, things that relate to teaching. And as teachers, we also do summative assessments. So
can I throw out a question to you that was asked? Is there a way to replace summative assessments with formative assessments?
Okay, that is an excellent question. The answer to that is they serve different purposes, right? So formative assessment tells us how we are learning, and summative assessment tells us what we have learned or where we are. So frequently, we might just get a letter grade, an A, B, C, or D, and that doesn't actually give us very much information about what we have learned. It just tells us we've mastered 50% or 75% of the material. So we would definitely want to make sure not to only use summative assessments or to use formative assessments. Summative assessments can also be quizzes, and formative assessments can also be quizzes too. So a quiz, I'm sure you've all had this experience where you've created the best quiz for your students, 10 questions. It took you 2 hours to write the quiz, 5 hours to grade the quizzes. You handed them back, and the students took one look at them, and that was it, right? So you gained all this knowledge about the students, whereas the students themselves really do not know how to gauge their own learning. So formative assessment is incremental, and it goes throughout the entire process of the learning cycle. And then, so that was a great question. Lisa, are there any other questions that you want me to address as we're going through here?
I've actually got one, and I'm not Lisa. But yes, we had several people, I think, asking about using this with adults. So it was, again, Joan Palomino Hernandez.
Oh, I'm just responding to him.
How can you use or develop this formative assessment with adults? They do not finish the school and the regular time. So is this something you can use with adult learners?
Of course, because in fact, adult learners are generally more in tune to what they're learning and what they need to learn. And so formative assessment helps them to gauge how they're doing with their learning. If you ask someone to think about if they've mastered the material, or they can use the material but they wouldn't feel comfortable being the teacher, then they begin to think about how well they know the material. So I think adult learners, formative assessment are excellent strategies to use.
Okay, but they seem to me in general, though, like these are strategies that are good for all types of learners then. Is this correct? Is this like something we normally do in our practice, or is this something you have to actually practice doing yourself as a teacher?
Oh, to use formative assessment in your own learning, Rob?
Yeah,
I guess I'm not...
like, or no, in your classroom. I mean, as a teacher, if you don't use this or you don't think you use it, do you have to do some sort of special practice to get this involved in your own work, or how do you do it?
Okay, great question. So one of the things that all teachers do, we always ask our students, how are you learning? Did you understand what I just told you? And maybe out of a class of 40, 5 or 6 students might have a question on the learning, but that doesn't always represent exactly what students have learned or how many students may still find the material challenging. So if you ask all students to participate, you'll be able to use that. So we already do formative assessment, but this is just being a little bit more mindful and thinking about what we learn as the teacher of using the formative assessment so that we can connect that to what we're going to teach tomorrow or to reteach tomorrow.
Lisa, I was going to say, I was in a classroom working right before Christmas, and I was trying to do the thumbs up, thumbs down to check my students' understanding of the assignment, and they struggled. So I think if these are new concepts for the students, it requires the teacher to practice and practice and practice. Once I got those students in small groups and then had time to teach them how to use the thumbs up, thumbs down, then they had no trouble doing it. So for those of you asking, how do I do this? I think the first step is you have to teach these strategies and concepts to your students. And then once they understand them, they're easy and quick and efficient to implement.
And they're fun and they're silly, and students will laugh because they're not quite sure that they're doing it correctly. So it's a great, exactly what I completely agree. It'll eventually become a routine and a norm for the classroom. And at first it is going to be a little confusing, and there's some confusion, but after that you figure it out, it's really kind of fun for the students.
Yeah, so don't give up on it if it doesn't work the first time. Keep teaching the strategies and have fun with it. And the other option on that thumbs up, thumbs down is make everyone close their eyes and they can't see what others are answering.
That's a great because sometimes students don't want to tell the entire class that they might be struggling with something. So
right.
That's a really great. And so
sorry.
That's okay, Rob. Go ahead.
I just had a very interesting one I'm trying to answer. It says, and I think this might have to do with what if you're like outside, you're not in a classroom. Someone asked about this is actually Carlos Cuyi from Ancash, Peru, asking how do you evaluate constantly in an ecological orchard? Now, I'm not really sure what that means. I'm trying to answer it, but I'm guessing is maybe you're outside and you're teaching something about nature and you're not actually in a classroom. Maybe you're showing plants, just saying how plants grow and the birds and the bees, things like that, literally the birds and the bees. How do you do some sort of assessment when you're out there in the middle of an orchard in the middle of the field somewhere?
That's a great question. How can you collect papers if your students don't have a paper to hand to you, or how do you put things on the board? That is a great question. You can do lots of different things. The elbow partner, that everyone has someone standing next to them. You could also have students work in groups. One thing I know that a lot of teachers are working on are activity centers, and formative assessment actually leads very well into having different types of activities, moving from location to location, which is what you might be doing in that beautiful orchard, ecological orchard that you're teaching them.
Okay, yeah. You can use it anywhere because a lot of these techniques don't actually require pen and paper, and you don't actually need to be in a classroom setting, because if you're outside, that's your classroom.
Exactly. So basically what you're trying to do is to create an environment where your students are talking to each other, they're checking their own learning, and that they're becoming more responsible for their own learning, and they're becoming more engaged. And so formative assessments are a way to achieve those goals.
Yes, and I've got one more actually. Jahaira, I hope I said that right, Landa, who asked, what happens if the majority of the class are used to missing the classes? So maybe you have students who come in once in a while. How do you some sort of summative assessment with them?
Okay, so you still, whenever they're in the classroom, you can still do summative assessment, or I'm sorry, formative assessment with them, because all of those take place during the classroom. But I think that's a great question. How can students begin to learn to check their own learning as they're going through the material at home? So going back to this 4 squares here, if students ask themselves these questions every day when they finish class, they will begin to self-guide what they need to learn for the next class. So hopefully if a student misses 5 or 6 classes or a couple of classes, they would be able to figure out, they would actually be able, when they came the next time, they would figure out, well, what do I need to learn to be able to connect to what the teacher's talking about today.
I was just going to give you a positive one, Lisa. People are saying this is a great topic and thanks, and it's very clear. So you're doing an awesome job.
Yes, I agree. But many people have been asking about grading. How do you grading and marking? What do you do? Are these things you actually literally mark? Do you have to mark these things?
Okay, that's a great question. So first, a little shout out to all of you teachers out there. I'm a teacher too, and this is my favorite thing to do, is to work with teachers. So I'm glad that this is going to be helpful for you, because we do not have any time to waste, that's for sure. So just to go back over, summative assessments are graded, and those are very serious, and those have long-term consequences, whether or not we pass a class or pass a unit or actually become teachers. But formative assessment is, we don't have to grade that, and that's the beauty of formative assessment. It's just a way for us to see how students are learning. In fact, if you're collecting papers from your students, we tend to want to give feedback to every individual student, but at the same time, we don't have to do that, because we can, the students can give feedback to them, to each other, to themselves, and you can give whole class feedback on how classes are doing.
I think another, maybe another idea for formative assessment that we've probably been taught in our early teaching years, those of us who have taught for a while, is it's really a check for understanding. You're wanting to make sure your students are understanding the topic, the content, before you continue to proceed on with new information. So think of it as kind of synonymous with the check for understanding. Would you agree, Lisa?
Oh, I would agree 100%. And that's, unfortunately, that's the one thing we tend not to have very much time to be able to do, because we have so much material that we need to cover. And so that the beauty of formative assessment, just a thumbs up, thumbs in the middle, and thumbs down takes 12 seconds, and then you have a real understanding of how students are doing.
Well, and so many people are saying, how do we do this with time? And I think that's the key part. A thumbs up, thumbs down just takes a couple seconds. An exit out the door or ticket out the door just takes 5 minutes at the end of the class, and then the teacher knows the next day if they need to review. So most of these strategies aren't going to take a lot of time, and yet they're going to give teachers great diagnostic tools or feedback.
And so it helps the teacher and it helps the students as well. Yeah.
All right, so I think we've answered a lot of questions. We can keep moving forward. And I guess if we need to come back and revisit this topic in the coming months, we can always return to more assessments.
And
Okay.
Jessica, the fellow in Mexico, says, thank you so much for the webinar, Lisa. This information is going to be so helpful for the teachers at her university. It's a great topic.
Oh, excellent. It really is, because as teachers, we never have enough time, and we have so much material. And so anything that we can use that works and helps us become more effective as teachers and help our students become more responsible, I think is so important. So I'm glad that people are finding that there's some information here that they can use.
All right, very good. So why don't we just do our little review, and I guess are we ready for our last poll question?
I think we could do that and see how we're doing. I'm really excited to hear how many A's, B's, C's, and D's that how things are going to end up here.
All right,
Okay.
let's share it out and we'll kind of look at it. All right, it looks like knowledgeable, which is answer B, as 72%. Very knowledgeable. It's climbed. It went up to almost 30%. I think we want to boost that up a little more in the future. But I think that those two answers are more than the final two, which are basically never heard of it or barely heard of it.
Okay, great. So this is really exciting for me, because one of the things that I am always hoping that teachers will be able to teach other teachers. We are our greatest assets, and we are our greatest partners and champions. We all know how hard it is to be an effective teacher. And so anytime that you can teach another teacher a trick or a strategy that you find helpful, then that's fantastic. So maybe next time we can, or at some point, we'll work with some teachers, and you can take some of this information back to some of your own meetings.
Can I ask another question that Jessica posted? Is metacognition taking part as part of the formative assessment too?
Oh, excellent question. So metacognition is such a great word, but meta meaning knowing, thinking to ourselves, knowing how we're knowing what we're knowing, basically. And so metacognition for our students is so important these days, because they also they're struggling with all of this information, and as they begin to understand how to learn is really an important tool, that if we can help our students figure that out at an early age, it crosses over to all different content areas.
Okay.
Do you have anything
All
you want to add to metacognition? That's a great question. These questions have been excellent, by the way.
Yeah, these teachers are really on top of it, aren't they?
I hope I have a chance to work with some of you in the future. Well, I guess just from Ecuador and from Peru and Mexico, I'm not sure where else some of our listeners are today, but we really want to, all around the world. That's fabulous. We just want to give you a thumbs up, and it sounds like some of you are going to be trying to use some of these formative assessments tomorrow in your classrooms or when you come back from vacation. And we really hope that you will, and don't be concerned if it doesn't, if it's a bit messy at first, because it gets better and easier as you move through some of these strategies. So here we have, there's some, you can just Google formative assessments and come up with all sorts of different ideas. If you wanted to go to some of these websites, you'll find additional information, more detailed information. We only put up 16. We only discussed about 5 or 6 different strategies. You can make up your own formative assessments and share those with us, and that would be great too.
And Lisa, I had a lot of questions come through that said they wanted to know about laundry room or laundry something. So I referred most of those people to go to your slides and look it up. I don't know if it's something you can say what it is really quickly, but many were interested. So if that was one of your questions, make sure you download the slides and look at the resources.
Okay.
Or which resource do they go to?
For the laundry, so laundry is that's a term that someone just said, oh, I'll just call this type of formative assessment a laundry. So it could be about anything. It could be where you group students and things like that. So there's different meanings behind the word laundry. So it depends on how you want to do that. That one, and there is one definition if you wanted to look at it from, that would be from the examples of formative assessment adapted from.
Okay, so that
research.
first website, they could find more information on the laundry. Great,
Correct,
thank you.
yeah. Okay, and so before we talk a little bit about Connie's webinar that's coming up, again, we have our L programs, we have our fellow programs. Anyone wants to join our Ecuador English Language Fellow Facebook page, that would be great. We'll post this webinar there, and we'll keep you updated on the very next one that we'll be doing next month from Chile.
And coming up next month, we have Ani Hani, if I said that right. She'll be calling in from Santiago, Chile, and she'll be talking about authentic writing activities. That will be on 28th of February, and from the same time, 15 to 1600 hours Lima time.
Lima time, which is different than Chile time. So if you're listening in from Chile, it'll be a little bit later, I think.
Yes. And I believe we have our information. And for all of you folks who want to learn more about our work here at RELO Andes, that's our website. We've got a Facebook page. We've got a Twitter handle, a Twitter feed. We've got everything just about here. So you can go on, you can log on, see what some of our activities are. So we have plenty of things that you can go back and listen to and learn some new stuff, hopefully.
I said I've learned a lot today too. So I appreciate everyone tuning in, and thanks Rob and Lisa, and a shout out to Ecuador, and very happy to be here.
Very good.
Let's do this again next month.
Yeah, thank you for calling in, Lisa, and we will join you next month, everyone.
Yeah, we'll see you all in February.
With Connie, yes.
Rob and I will be signing off from the embassy. Have a great evening, everyone.
Hasta luego.
Nos vemos.
Good night, everyone.